Join in. So, hey everybody, thank you so much for coming to the Graphic Medicine Confab. I'm going to use a lot of air quotes today. I'm just in that kind of mood, so strap in because here we go with the air quotes, which is why record is so important. I'm Kriota Willberg. I'm facilitating for this meet, but we have 3 more meetings to come, and Georgia Weber, Joel Christian Gill, and Ben Schwartz will each be facilitating one of those. So I thought before we started in, the way the format's going to work is I'm going to talk about the topic du jour, essentially ideas around how to make comics with dangerous information and kind of defining what dangerous is. And I'll do a short, like a brief presentation on that, and then essentially we'll just open the floor. Georgia and Joel and Ben can like make some comments, and then after them we'll just open the floor to everybody, and we'll just have some conversations about like what this can mean. We can ask each other questions and like share ideas. But I also thought that since this is the first meeting, that the 4 of us should just introduce ourselves to you briefly to kind of give you a sense of our background and who we are. So I guess I'll start with me. I'm Kriota Willberg. I'm a cartoonist. I also was a massage therapist for over 30 years, which makes one of my eyebrows go up every time I think about that. So I have some background in healthcare. I've been working in comics for the last almost 10 years now, and like my exclusive focus is graphic medicine because of my background and my interests. I also have a certificate in bioethics from Montefiore Einstein because bioethics add really excellent drama to anything you're doing. And I'm really interested in that as well. And I teach graphic medicine seminars at NYU in their humanistic medicine department. So that's me. So Georgia or Joel or Ben, do you want to introduce yourself? Yeah.
I'll go next. Yeah, hi, I'm Georgia Weber, and some of you know me and some of you maybe not, but I'm primarily making graphic medicine work from my own experience. My first book was Dumb, Living Without a Voice, about my chronic vocal pain condition. And then I just this past year collaborated on a book with a woman who had a very traumatic experience with a medical reaction called TEN, which is toxic epidermal necrolysis. And in doing so, or in going through that, lost her sight, and while she was losing it, started a graphic memoir. So we actually collaborated this past year to finish it 15 years later, and that was my first foray into doing something that was not like a personal piece of work. I was doing someone else's personal work. So yeah, I'm on the graphic medicine track now. I'm back to doing personal work, but it seems to be the only thing that holds my attention for long enough to make a book about it. So that's me.
Joel or Ben, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Unmute. Whoever had unmute your mic, you can go bingo. You can hit bingo card now. Unmute your mic. I'm Joel Christian Gill. I have written a number of graphic novels, Strange Fruit, Uncelebrated Narratives from Black History, and Tales from the Talented Tenth. My most recent book is a book called Fights, One Boy's Triumph Over Violence, which just came out. I am an associate professor of illustration at Mass College of Art and Design. Previously, I was the chair of the Comic Arts Department at the New Hampshire Institute of Art.
Hi, I'm Ben Schwartz. I'm a cartoonist. I draw single panel gag cartoons, mostly for the New Yorker. Not specifically graphic medicine related, but I also have a medical background, and I teach comics and visual storytelling to medical students at Columbia University.
So yay, so that's who we are. And we hope you'll come back for the next 3 meetings after this, because we'll be looking at different topics and talking about comics making at different times. So I'm going to start in. I'm going to just like give a brief presentation, like 12-ish minutes. I'm going to try and keep it really brief, and we'll fly by. And then after that, we can all start talking. Also, just to let you know, I can't follow the chat today. Like my eyes are having some tracking issues with my computer. It's just what happens sometimes. So when we start the conversation also, hand raising is good, and Joel, Georgia, or Ben may also like end up helping to host and just to negotiate people to make sure everybody gets to talk when they want to talk. If I can't see you or find you in enough time. But okay, so let's go ahead and get started. If I'm looking away from you, it's because I'm looking at my other screen, but I'm thinking about you as I'm looking away from you. So, all right. So I picked the idea of like dangerous information to talk about, because dangerous information is really a subjective kind of idea. Like I think we can all agree that information that might be dangerous for one person might be liberating for someone else, right? Something that's threatening to one person may actually help to confirm or just like enable someone else's perspective or idea. So we're really, you know, as cartoonists, when we're making work about dangerous information, it's good to keep in mind that it's a subjective state, but still the danger can be real to somebody, right? Essentially, there are 2 kind of main dangers that I choose to work with in my comics. One is really simple. It's not that terrible, but it's kind of what I like to call cringy information. Like it's information about like medical procedures or surgical procedures or other things about the body that are kind of cringe inducing in some people who may feel a little squeamish. It might like evoke, you know, like ideas around body horror, and it can send a reader running right when I want to keep them engaged in like whatever it is I'm talking about. And then the second category that I am going to be talking about today is information that could be a threat to your sense of self, that like invites you to like reconsider who you are, your worldview, and can really start to like break down some constructions of how we feel the world is and how we navigate it. And that can be very threatening to people. But I also want to say my way of working with these ideas is not the only way out there. And I bet other people have like more interesting ways of working. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this. But I'm going to start with the first category, which is the cringy stuff. And let's see. All right. Can everybody see? Can everyone see my screen? We're good?
Yes.
Okay. Somehow I lost my view of everybody else. Fascinating. Huh? Okay. All right. So what you're looking at here on my screen is a 2-page spread from a book that I'm working on for Workman Publishing. It's a 200-page book about surgery. And it's a book that's supposed to be a commercial book for everybody and anybody who wants to read about like the inside scoop of surgery and what's really going on and all these other kinds of things. And the book talks about 12 different types of surgery, and some of them are very intense. And this page is typical of a number of pages in the book that actually show a detailed sequence of a surgical procedure. So the one I picked today to show you is actually like in real life, it's a very emotionally intense procedure because it's called an emergency department thoracotomy, and it's a surgery where the surgeon cuts into the rib cage and spreads open the chest in order to access the heart if the patient has, say, had a gunshot wound to the heart. So lives are at stake. It's a big emergency situation. It can be very disturbing to read about this kind of thing. And so for cringy information, first of all, this is a draft. It still needs to be checked over by the surgeons I'm working with on this book. So if you're reading details, just be warned, it may not totally work. But it's also typical of, like, it presents some of the ideas that I use when I try to do this kind of thing. And one thing, when you look at the two-page spread, one of the things that for me I think works right away is that I'm using pastel colors. I'm using pretty colors. They're very inviting. They're pastels. Nothing is garish and nothing is really gripping. I'm also making some soft jokes to present the context of the work. So each surgery has a chapter. There's comics around the surgery to tell you about its context and, like, the more serious aspects of it. And then there's a sequence. And every sequence starts with the title, How to Perform Whatever in 10 Easy Steps. So everything is always 10 easy steps. It doesn't matter if you're having a cesarean section, or you're getting an appendectomy, or you're a gunshot victim and you're getting your chest opened up so they can give you cardiac massage. It's all 10 easy steps. And again, that's a way to kind of equalize and smooth out the information in the transitions. I make some other mild jokes, like down here. I'm gonna just circle this for you. Each step has a little header, and when the heartbeat comes back, I'm making a joke that says, we've got the beat, because now we have the heartbeat. I also have down here in this corner, oops, sorry, well, here, I'll go like that. I have a surgeon and a patient character who are also kind of helping to moderate the sequence. And I'm trying to draw it as cutely as I can. The patient, again, this is a very rough sketch, but the patient is kind of like round and bulbous and cute. Their eyes are closed and their eyelids make little smiley faces, and their nose makes a little smiley face, and their mouth makes a little smiley face. So they're peaceful and smiling, even as this crazy stuff is happening to them. So these are some technical ways that I handle, like, difficult information for people. Fun colors, soft jokes, cute, harmless characters, and no graphic depictions of in this case, of the surgery itself. So this is just a brief thing that I wanted to show you here. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about is much more, it's about information that's threatening to the self. And a couple years ago, I discovered a compelling way to argue that white people in the present day can't deny a direct benefit from unethical medical research inflicted on enslaved people in the antebellum South. And it's a very complicated argument. Here, I will actually show you a page. You can see in the upper right-hand corner here, whoops, still got the wrong. Okay, never mind. Here in this corner, you can see I introduced myself. I was researching the history of sutures and ligatures at the New York Academy of Medicine. So I came upon, like, a great argument. I'm not going to tell you the story of the comic, but I wanted to talk about the challenges I had to work through to make a comic that I could actually be comfortable with and proud of, like, in this context. And I'd never made a comic focusing on race and health justice before, and that was very intimidating to me. Questions that would arise in my mind as I was contemplating this project would be things like, how do I have any authority in talking about atrocities to enslaved people? How am I going to keep a reader reading about such horrible events? And then also, what if I screw up my narrative and cause harm or offense to someone who's reading the book? Like, this is also a primary concern of mine, that somehow I wasn't equipped to be able to do this, and that I would actually end up really screwing it up and people would take offense at it. One of the partial solutions to this was meticulous research with a ton of footnotes and citations. And actually the book, the comic book it's a 19-page story, but it also has 8 pages of citations and footnotes in the back, because that's what I do. But you can also access this on Spiral Bound. And Joel was going to do me the favor of putting the links up for the comic book and the Spiral Bound link if you're interested in looking at it later. So beyond the technical solutions, I felt like I had to do a lot of internal and emotional work to figure out how to make this project work for me. And I wanted to share some of that process with you. So I'm not going to go over the structure of the book per se, but I'm going to talk about like some of the things that I had to ask myself in order to make it. So, and the first question is, who am I? Who am I to make this book? Well, I'm a 50-something white cisgendered female cartoonist with a background in healthcare and embroidery. So, who's gonna be interested in that? It's a very my interests are very specific, and also, I feel like the older I get, the less people are interested in what I have to say. So I feel my voice diminishing, and I'm wondering who's going to pay attention to me. And then I realized people like me are going to pay attention to me. So I wrote this book for 2 middle-aged and older white women interested in medicine who also like to embroider. So probably all 5 of them out in the country. And also I'm hoping it will find its way into the hands of some women who may not be convinced of the depth and impact of racism on their health and their lives. Because I'm hoping this is a book that can kind of like tip their decision-making process over the edge. I don't have to change everybody's mind. I just want to change a couple of people's minds. So then it starts to come down to, how am I going to do that? So, you know, I use a lot of pastel colors. I tell a story about going into the park with my friend Molly, who's a doctor, and she starts teaching me how to suture fruit. We wound fruit and then we suture it up, and we start talking about the history of medicine, and also of sewing, of medical sewing and decorative sewing. But part of the point of this whole setup here also is that I've been thinking about shame a lot. In the last 5 years, I've really been kind of like thinking about my own reactions to shame, and like observing shaming, how people shame other people, and then also their reactions. And I feel like shame is often used as a weapon to break women down and get them to conform. An act of shaming, when it works, can really bludgeon people into changing their behaviors, but it can't make them change their hearts. So I feel like if we can arrive at healthy feelings of shame, if we can find a place to healthy shame and healthy guilt on our own, then we can use it to accept horror, and we can use it to recognize responsibility and help us open our hearts and change who we are. So in a way, what I started doing here was I started kind of plotting a seduction, which sounds kind of weird, but here I am, a harmless older woman. I like embroidery. Isn't this comfy? We're in the park. We're suturing bananas. I'm like using a lot of pastel colors. And then I'm like showing chipmunks, and I'm talking about surgical procedures. So everything is kind of, it's like some harsh activity, but it's in a softened, you know, I'm again using technique to soften the message. But then I start laying out, as we're talking about history, I start laying out historical atrocities also in pastel colors, right? And then for the rest of the book, I try to give the reader a safe space to feel shame. So I talk about the history of surgery. I talk about some of the horrible things that have been done in the name of research and in the name of science. And I also talk about how those horrible things have benefited me personally in terms of medicine and my own health. So I use my own character to help create this space, right? So here, all right. So here now I've talked about, I've also laid out the experiences of enslaved women being used as subjects for gynecological surgical research. And my character reacts badly to this information. So if you look down on the lower corner here, you can see me, my character saying, sure, I'm white, but this happened over 177 years ago. I don't have kids. Sims, the guy who did the research, Sims's research didn't directly benefit me. And then I say, but I can't say it, it's not true. And then I spend the rest of the time essentially explaining why it's not true. I talk about it in historical contexts. And then I also talk about it, what's going on here? And then I also talk about it in personal contexts, like how it literally relates to me, my body, and my friends, and my future as a patient. So there's no escape for me from this reality. There is none. And at the end of the narrative, my character feels shame and guilt, but then the character also feels gratitude. So I'm trying to like create this place where we can look at shame and guilt as a good thing, something to be thankful for. And in the context of this story, sewing has given my character an emotional connection to creativity and her gender. And now there's also the addition of it symbolizing the history of medicine and the suffering of enslaved. So now there's a craft in my life that I can actually use to relate to understanding other people. So I kind of like drop a bomb on myself in this story, and then I show my gratitude for it. And then I follow up with some other things, like some embroidery pieces that I actually do about, that were, had kind of helped to illustrate the book. So those are the techniques I wanted to talk about, like essentially having to like do some personal work in order to create an emotional space so that readers like me, not every reader, but readers like me who might be timid about these things or like need a little hand holding to come to a new place of understanding can get that hand holding, but are also going to like be kind of fed an undeniable truth. And then also a rationale for why this can't be denied. So, so that's what I do. That's my approach. And that's actually my first and only book that is about race. It's also, you know, it's not for everybody, but I actually think it's one of the best things I've ever done, and it may be the best piece I ever do. We'll see what happens. So yeah, so there you go. Georgia or Joel or Benjamin, do you guys have any comments you want to make or anything before we just open it up to everybody? Sure.
I was just going to say, I think I think it's really important. I've been thinking about this thing about guilt and shame a lot lately, just because we live in America and that's sort of the thing that's happening right now. And I think the way in which you talk about like how you use that and being grateful, and I think to turn that around in other aspects is like, don't think about it as being guilt or shame. Think about it as being like, you should be as angry as we are about these things that are happening out here in the world. And I think that's another thing to think about. It's like, nobody cares about shame or guilt. It's like it's the anger that we need in order to change the system. It's the reason why Sims, you know, because he's no longer there, right?
Right.
And it's why we're having these really difficult conversations now. So, and I think the way you talk about, like, you know, dealing with guilt and dealing with shame and also coming to terms with it is really a really interesting and good way to think about it as well.
Thank you. Thanks. Anybody else? Giorgio or?
Yeah, I'm always subject in these situations to like be polite and wait and like hang back and be like, oh, I'm not gonna take this space. But yeah, I mean, I love Silverwire for all of the same reasons, like the things that you're discussing there. And actually, I mean, it's in everything else you're doing too. But that one really, I think it spoke to me in the way that you were trying to reach someone, and I'm not exactly a part of that demographic, but
Right.
I'm close, and I was really touched by it. And also, one of the things that I really, really liked about your approach that you discussed just now is the idea of authority. Authority in the subjects you're discussing, but also it calls to mind like the authority of an artistic view at all, because so many people would view it as dispensable. But actually, saying anything at any point, you're wielding a certain amount of authority, and your status in society, a racist, colonialist, capitalist society, also has an idea about your authority. But I really appreciated you starting there, and it's like almost even using the word authority is claiming a little bit of that power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you could phrase the question to be like, who am I to say this thing? Who am I, like, but actually that suggests that it's possible for you to be no one and have no authority at all. Where
Well,
I don't think that's possible, really. Like,
but I actually like the idea of being nobody at all. Like when limitations are put on me, I like to take them and then try to pull them like so far in that they just like kind of explode and like move outwards again. It's like, you know, who am I? I am no one, but I happen to vote and I have a bank account, you know, and I teach your children.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
so you know, people who are powerless actually can find power within the context of their own lives. And I'm really, in all of my work in different aspects, I'm really into the idea of like figuring out like what are the limitations and then trying to just lean into them in a way that's going to like turn them around and like make them power.
yeah,
So,
yeah, that's amazing.
so anyway, thanks.
I mean, just first of all, really just amazing and powerful work. Uh,
Thanks.
I know that at all times, but especially in this moment, I personally struggle a lot with coming up with an answer to who am I that allows me to keep going and to keep, you know, producing something for others. Um, I really, I haven't come to a conclusion for myself on that, and whether I have, you know, whether I can add something of value right now, or whether my greatest value would come from shutting up. Um, so I continue to think about that, and as I think about that, I mostly shut up. I err on that side. One thing, sort of shifting gears a little bit though, but you know, one thing I was struck by just looking at the first examples of the surgery book, which, I mean, to the rest of you, I've had the privilege of seeing more pages of that. It is fantastic, and going to be a very valuable resource for a lot of people. But what struck me was that in healthcare, it seems like the two different types of dangers that you were talking about really come together in that a lot of the medical establishment, like the older doctors that are sort of running things in the hospital, their worldview is very threatened by the notion of presenting cringy material to patients and to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of a radical idea for some people, for some, you know, older doctors to, you know, really educate people and put them on something closer to a level playing field in terms of, you know, knowing the good, bad, and the ugly of what's going on in their body, and, you know, in terms of dealing with these conditions.
Yeah, and that's, and that's also like a really unpredictable factor, like when people want to, like I've worked with people, with patients, cancer patients at Sloan Kettering who, have really wanted to know everything, and then they found out everything, and then they really wish they hadn't. And I know other patients who like don't want to, like nothing, they don't want to hear it. Like it's a really, and I can't imagine being a doctor and like trying to be able to predict like how best to answer the patient's question. Like, and yeah, I can totally see how some people would just be really, some doctors would be really like threatened by the idea of like having to disclose this stuff. I mean, surgery is, it's violence. Like you're cutting a body open. It's very intense. It's a really unique kind of situation. Yeah. So I'm really curious to hear from you guys, who I am gesturing to on my screen now. Does anyone want to like either ask a question or talk about like a different approach you use to like working with threatening information? Does anybody have anything? You can, I think there's like a raise your hand icon or something in the corner of your screen, or like on the side, you can raise your hand. Anybody? In the participant, oh, if you go down to participants, right, and click there. Anybody? Ah, Shelley, was that you? Where'd you go?
Yeah, just Kriota. Hi, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
And just to I can't wait to see your surgery book.
Thanks, me too.
and my experience is mainly kind of equips me to speak to the cringy material. Or one of my first jobs as a medical illustrator was illustrating sexual development and variations on genital anatomy and intersex conditions for parents. And a lot of what you said resonated with that. And another big part is depicting the whole person.
Mm-hmm.
As you described how you made this sort of blobby person look very sort of friendly and peaceful and happy, and that idea of how medical representations are so often very disembodying and objectifying.
Yeah, yeah.
And so trying to convey the idea, this is a person, this is a part of a whole person that we're talking about is a really important, I think, a really important element of trying to, make that information more accessible and less alienating.
Yeah, and I think that would be really difficult for like an illustration job. I do some medical and anatomical illustration, not a lot, but like I'm just drawing parts. When I do that, like my work is not very sophisticated. I'm just like drawing a hip muscle or, like an incision or whatever. But I'm really curious, like how can you like help people looking at your illustrations make those connections and still keep it within like the trends of like what educational contexts are these days? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, well, I mean, just to kind of elaborate on the example I gave, I think one of the things, well, particularly when children are born with, sorry,
Okay.
like with atypical anatomy, and there's this tendency to kind of focus on that, like there's something wrong with my child.
Uh-huh.
And so I think by starting with always a representation of a whole child, it just reinforces that idea, the idea that no, this is your child, and they're a whole child. There's something, they have a variation in this one part of their body, but it's instead of just, you go right into that picture that you always see of the little, just like the sort of episiotomy position and the genitals, and it's like, oh my God, this is all we're talking about, and it's abnormal. So it was just a small point I wanted to make about the representation of the whole person in those kind of contexts.
Great, thanks. Hey, Brian, I see your hand is up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You just said something in your presentation that really struck a chord with me, because it sort of mirrored some thinking I did. I did a book called Mom's Cancer a long time ago. It was about my mom's treatment and treatment for lung cancer and the effect that had on our family and that sort of thing. And I made a very conscious decision at the start of that, when I started doing that project. My first thought was, well, I'm writing a book about cancer, I better make these drawings as dark and gloomy and screechy, scratchy and gothic as I could, and cross-hatch the shit out of it. And I can do that. I have the artistic skill to do that. And I decided very early that, like you with your pastels and your sort of cute, whimsical illustrations, that what I needed to do was exactly the opposite. That I wanted the artwork to be as open and light and inviting as possible, to bring the reader into the story, not instantly repel them, because my goal was to have people read the thing.
Right.
So I wanted to invite them into this friendly space that, in my mind, looked like a 1950s comic strip. In my mind, I thought of Mom's Cancer as family circus in hell. That's what I was doing. So I wanted to invite people in, and then I knew the story would have enough drama and enough meat in it that I'd suck them in and then I'd hit them between the eyes, kind of thing. But I wanted to get them in, and that was very important to me. And I think in comics, as much as film or any other visual medium, the medium is the message. How you decide to tell a story shapes that story and how it's going to be perceived and received. I think about, the books that my friends MK and Sarah did. They have their own drawing styles, and that style tells you, not just about the author and the author's abilities and their how facile they are with the medium, but it shapes the story. It is the voice of the story. And I think that's the most important thing you can think of when you're starting a project like this, right at the very start, before you put anything on pen to paper or pixels on screen, is how the style is going to shape the message you want to deliver. I think that's crucial. It's the most important decision you can make before you do anything.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, because it also helps you set the tone, and it frees up your writing much more quickly if you know exactly what you're going in for. Okay. So I see Mario next, and then Shannon after Mario.
Hold on, Kriota. Patricia had a question about the use of your color palettes, and do you ever use other types of palettes?
I do. I use other types of palettes. The palette for Silver Wire, I swiped from Adventure Time because I was thinking, okay, I need a palette that makes everybody happy. Where am I going to get that, right? And it's Adventure Time is the perfect comic and cartoon for that. So yeah, I do vary my palettes. I still haven't found what I would consider my signature palette yet, but I find myself relying on Adventure Time colors quite a bit. Okay, so anybody else have a question in the chat, or should we go to Shannon and Mario?
You can go to Shannon and Mario. That's fine. Shannon, Mario's first on mine, so.
Oh, okay, then Mario, let's put you up first, and then. Okay, well, you go up first, because now.
Sure. Sure. So I just wanted to share a thought in terms of what Brian was just talking about, and earlier when you were mentioning shame. I was thinking more actually about stigma and kind of its connection in that same way, and thinking about both Brian's book and at the time, cancer not being something as openly spoken about, much less drawn about, and then thinking about MK's book and HIV, and then in your work on Silver Wire, this idea of either, systemic racism as being informative in the development of our medical education system. Sometimes, as compared to thinking about that as shame, thinking about stigma and the fact that there are so many topics that we're reticent to speak about, what does it enable in us to make space available for a conversation to happen, so that in fact maybe it's less about the shame that someone feels, but more empowering them to say, well, I wouldn't know how to talk about this in any other context unless somebody else gave me something to look at. And now that I can look at something that's another example, another story, another life, I can think about my connection either to that experience or that life, but it also allows me to introduce things that I've been afraid to say or ask or talk about because I didn't have any other reference point beforehand. So it's just kind of maybe flipping the coin over and thinking about, shame with this very negative connotation, but stigma as being something we can all work towards undoing if we open up more room to talk about it. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea.
That's really good. And the other thing is just the fact that someone has made something that you can look at. Even if you're saying that is not for me, that still points you in a direction that is for you. So even if we're looking at work that doesn't speak to us the way we want it to, like it can give us a sense of direction and help us like turn ourselves to like make other work that has another unique voice. And so, yeah, I think that that's like really, really important. Shannon, did you want to talk?
Sure. So I guess I should say I'm coming at this from a different perspective. And this is actually my first graphic medicine, any kind of anything to interact with. I'm really new to graphic medicine. And what interests me about it the most is I do have a health science background. I was a cancer researcher in a previous employment position, and also I researched neurodegenerative diseases. And so I have the health science background, but what I'd like to do is where I work, they have a series of courses. They're called WELL courses. And at the 400 level, students are asked to look at a social justice issue and work with a social justice organization. And I'm in Massachusetts, so I was looking at working with Tapestry Health to try and do something with, have my students create graphic novels on health issues, working with Tapestry Health. So any thoughts or considerations? And I have looked at the graphic medicine website. I know they have that university course and suggestions there. But like I said, just several weeks into looking into graphic medicine and had this idea, thoughts, directions, anything.
Okay, so I see Olga and Kathy and Brian all have their hands up. So Olga, did you have a suggestion for Shannon?
No, I did not, although I want to applaud her for doing that. I think that's brilliant. I just raised my hand because I had a question.
Yeah, I think everybody except for Brian had their hand up before Shannon asked her question. So maybe Brian has, do you have something you want to add, Brian?
Yeah, I just had a suggestion, and I'm not sure what you're looking for your students, but have you seen the series of, or the flu comic that David Lasky and Meredith Lee Volmer did for King County, Washington Public Health? Because I think it's just extraordinary work, and it was publicly funded, and the idea was give a little, and this was way before our pandemic, give a little background on the 1918 flu pandemic, and just basically it's a public health thing of telling people stories about the old days, but also just teaching people to wash their freaking hands and stuff like that. It's been translated into something like literally 70 languages. They've given out thousands and thousands of free copies of this thing. And as I understand it, it's made a terrific difference up there in the Northwest. So I don't know if that's the kind of thing you have in mind, but I think it's a really interesting model of sort of the public-private partnership of getting graphic medicine out into the community. It's King County Public Health Department. If you look up No Ordinary Flu. Oh, he's got a link to it here, yeah.
I'll put it in the chat.
But No Ordinary Flu is the name of it. Check that out.
Thank you. Yeah, it's social justice and health disparities is what I'm very interested in. So something along those lines, that sounds like a good resource to check out. Thank you.
Okay, Olga, should we go with you now?
Thank you. So as someone who can't draw even a stick figure, I'm just here because I teach and facilitate narrative medicine workshops. So we use graphic novels, obviously, more and more in the world of narrative medicine. And I just think that another way that that your work, I think, facilitate, what it does is that it facilitates these difficult conversations in terms of giving a means to having talks about death, the nitty gritty about the intricacies of death and dying, or race, which I think right now is so important, right? Which is why your book is so crucial. But and allows us, it's a vehicle, if you will, to say, this is where I stand on this issue. Where are you, you know, in this, in your understanding of where are, in your implication of white privilege, whatever it may be. But I think that it's brilliant because I think, like Mario was saying, it does flip the coin. It does allow you to, it's a point of entry, even, and it's an easier much point of entry than to say, here's this humongous book that you must read and then come back and then we could have this conversation. I just think that it just lends itself easy access, and you can have it for various ages. So I just think that it just also helps in teaching and in having conversations with people. So I just think it's just really brilliant in this day and age, especially. So when people are reaching out because they know this is the work that Mario and I do, for example, they're like, oh, do you think I should read this book? I'm like, here's much more accessible books. Yeah, you can go read that. I think it's great. But if you want to have an easier conversation with your kid about this, these are some other much more accessible books that are also worth a read.
That's really great to hear. I really love hearing you talk about this. And I also just want to make one comment, which is, there are professional cartoonists out there whose entire careers are built on not being able to draw. So you should not sell.
So there's hope. There's hope for me yet.
Yes, there's hope for you yet. You should not sell yourself short in terms of your.
My husband and daughter have unequivocally told me to put down the microphone and put down the pencil. So
they're not professionals, so we're professionals. You can listen to us. They're not professionals.
Okay, there you go. I can't wait to go tell them this.
Great.
Kathy has a question.
Okay, great, Kathy.
Hey, yeah, kind of maybe, oh boy, I hate to be like, I have a comment more than a question, but yeah, it is just kind of like, yeah, no, it's from my experience, but also I'd love to hear if other people experience this too, is I found that in addressing really negative topics, it feels good, and I feel like it makes it real to incorporate the negative emotions. So if it's a really like threatening or scary disease, have the characters in there be like, this sucks. I hate everything about it right now. Oh my God, I'm so frightened. Everything about this sucks. Flip a table. Or even just petty things like, oh, I can't wear my favorite shoes because of this disease, that kind of thing. And I find it's really like people empathize with that. And the people who maybe are living with those conditions, it really reflects their experience. The only thing that I find that's a real challenge about that is having to kind of temper it for official publications. Like if something's going to go in a waiting room or in a clinic, well, you can't put the F-bomb in there, even if that's what people are genuinely saying when they've been diagnosed with that. Or, you got to make it a little bit more approachable and not just, this sucks. I hate everything about it right now.
Well, that's one of the strengths of your work also, is that you are really good at getting your characters to react to these situations. And one of my favorite mini comics of yours is the one about why do I have to wait so long for my doctor? What's the title of that one?
What the hell? Why is my doctor so late?
Yes, what the hell? Why is my doctor so late? Like, it's a really great mini comic. It's titled in a way that allies itself with the patient, but if you read it, the doctor and the patient are allying together because they're both pissed that the patient has to wait so long. So it's really good because it's also like, even though it has it looks like it's about to start like bitching about the medical system. What it does is it actually like supports the doctor's position as well. So I feel like you found a really good way to like kind of get that out there and get that going in very honest language, which is pretty fun. Have you been able to get that in anyone's waiting room?
No, that's the thing. It's not appropriate to put in a waiting room. It's just got a really rude title on it, and it's like, and everybody understands, and like all the doctors who read it, like everybody who reads it nods along, but it's just too sassy for waiting rooms. So that's kind of one of the challenges I deal with. Maybe if it were just on the interior, no, but it's just, you know, a lot of medical institutions are very august, and you know, they got a lot of dignity, and they got to kind of look out for that reputation. You know, they want to use the word utilize instead of use. They got to look like they're educated and they know what they're doing. This kind of stuff rocks for like people just being like, hey, check this thing out, like that. But it's hard to get official endorsement.
You know, that's interesting because it also brings up the idea that medical institutions can find information threatening or dangerous to them. So like there are all sorts of different perspectives that we can use to look at like what we're trying to say, who's going to read it, how they're going to perceive it, and also how we perceive it as we're like making it. So yeah, so now we've added one more group that can be threatened, which is essentially institutional medicine. Okay, so we're over time, yay, because it was a short 45 minutes. Are there any other questions, any other comments before we wrap up? How are we doing?
I just want to remind everybody to check the chat. There's a lot of links that are great.
Yeah, I've been linking. If anybody said anything, like linked you and put your stuff in the chat. So check out the links in there.
Great, yeah, and we'll we're recording this, and then we'll also we'll make a text file or something in the chat, and then also like have it available for you guys. So once we figure out when and how we get it posted, I'll send you all an email that lets you know where it is also. So good. Well, I guess thus endeth the first Graphic Medicine Confab. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and also my co-conspirators who are awesome, awesome cartoonists, and I can hardly wait. Who's next time in 2 weeks? Joel, do you know?
I'm going to talk about emotion and style. So since my book is about it's a memoir, I'm going to be talking about how to take the emotion and turn it into something that people can actually feel.
Great. Okay. I guess I'll just be the interlocutor and sing us out. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Bye. Thanks for coming.
Great.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
I missed everything.